The immigrant experience, the second wave.
Second wave immigration was an immigration movement from the 1870s to the 1930s when an influx of immigrants from particularly Eastern Europe and China entered the United States. There were many push and pull factors involved with the coming of second wave immigrants. Primarily, the reasons were economic reasons and new economic opportunities in the United States. However, auxiliary reasons included wars, such as the Franco-Prussian War.
Economic hardships. Many of the immigrants coming over had few resources and had trouble trying to find a place to live. Women and children often had to work in factories for families to be able to earn enough money to live.
The reason for the rapid influx of immigrants into America can be summed up by Ernst Ravenstein's quote, "Bad or oppressive laws, heavy taxation, an unattractive climate, uncongenial social surroundings, and even compulsion have produced and are still producing currents of migrations, but none of these currents can compare in volume with that which arises from the desires inherent in most men to better themselves in material respects."
Jobs available to immigrants were usually low-skill factory or mining jobs. These jobs were usually long and paid barely enough to sustain a living, because the immigrants were willing to accept these lower wages. The pay got even lower if the job was given to a woman or child, as was necessary due to the overall low wages. A couple examples of industries where immigrants worked include the railroad industry, the mining industry, and the factory industry.
Living and working conditions. For industry jobs, the hours were long and the pay was low. It got even lower for the women and children who were forced to work in factories. With few restrictions in place, many factory jobs are very dangerous, and there was little compensation for those who got sick or were injured on the job.
Housing was not any better, until progressive reformers such as Jane Addams established settlement houses of good quality. Most residential establishments were in horrible, unsanitary conditions, as photographed by Jacob Riis in this picture on the right. The next major category for the immigration experience in America were the societal responses. This is a picture of an Italian ethnic community.
Ethnic communities were formed when newly arrived immigrants would settle with other immigrants who came from the same country as them. These ethnic communities often had shops and schools that would engage in both English and their old language. These communities helped groups hold on to their old culture and language, and many such communities exist even today.
One important societal response was the formation of cultural gangs. These relied on culture as the binding force to hold the gangs together, and they organized crime and fought against discrimination against their ethnicity. The most widely known example of this was the Italian Mafia.
While the first generation of immigrants to come over often had trouble learning the language and culture of the United States, their children were generally far more successful in learning the language and joining with the new culture.
In response to the influx of immigrants, many native-born Americans began to support a policy of nativism. These workers feared job loss to the immigrants who were willing to work for less pay. These workers formed nativist or anti-immigrant groups such as the American Protective Association and the Immigration Restriction League. Nativist sentiment also spilled over to governmental policy as well.
Our next category is over political restrictions faced by immigrants. A political view on assimilation as seen by Theodore Roosevelt is that, in the first place, we should insist that if an immigrant who comes here in good faith becomes an American and assimilates himself to us, he shall be treated on an exact equality with everyone else, for it is an outrage to discriminate against any such man because of creed or birthplace or origin. But this is predicated upon the person's becoming in every facet an American, and nothing but an American. There can be no divided allegiance here.
Bosses and political machines, due to the desperate nature of many of the immigrants, were able to easily take advantage of the immigrants to promote their political machines. They would give the immigrants a place to live and food and would provide other favors. However, they were also expected to vote for the political machines. This is a picture of Boss Tweed, one of the most famous party bosses.
One of the largest political restrictions in place for immigrants was the Chinese Exclusion Act. This act excluded any Chinese from immigrating to America. The justification for this was that Chinese were working for lower wages and stalling the effort of labor unions. It was also believed that they would refuse to assimilate to American society.
Besides the Chinese Exclusion Act, Congress also passed policies to inhibit the flow of immigrants into America. One example is a tax of 50 cents, which was placed on each immigrant to prevent some of the poorer immigrants from entering the United States. Congress also passed a policy to prevent those who are disabled or mentally ill from entering the United States as well.
Nativist organizations. The APA and the IRL were the two main nativist organizations formed. The American Protective Association tried to limit jobs available to immigrants, only allowing for the lowest wage and worst conditioned jobs for immigrants, while the Immigration Restriction League mainly focused on restricting immigration to only the higher wealth and higher skilled Europeans.